Good afternoon. Today I'll be giving you a very brief commentary on Samuel Johnson's poem London, which is a part of our curriculum. Samuel Johnson's London was a poem which was produced shortly after he moved to London. It was written in 1738 and essentially it was his first major published work. The poem in 263 lines imitates Juvenal's third satire, expressed by the character of Thales as he decides to leave London for Wales. Johnson perhaps imitated Juvenal because of his fondness for the Roman poet and also because he was following a very popular 18th century literary trend of Augustan poets headed by Alexander Pope that favored imitations of classical poets, especially for the younger and upcoming poets as they ventured into writing verse for the first time. Though Johnson's London was published anonymously, James Boswell, his biographer, later records the extreme enthusiasm with which the poem was greeted by Londoners, and Boswell said that everybody was delighted with it, and there being no name to it, the first buzz of literary circles was, "Here is an unknown poet, greater than even Pope," who was a celebrated poet in his own right at the time. Pope himself, we knew later, was impressed by the poem and made efforts to discover and later to assist its author. In fact, in Johnson's biography, Boswell describes Pope's feelings and conduct on the occasion of London's appearance as candid and liberal, and Boswell himself calls the poem, quote unquote, this justly celebrated poem, which speaks of the general blaze of its excellence and declares that it is undoubtedly one of the noblest productions in our language, both for sentiment and expression. Later critics described how it was preeminently a social satire which in Johnson's hands essentially transformed into a political satire, and argued that the poem's popularity is not to be attributed solely to poetic merit, but to its political content as well. Essentially, when we study Johnson's London today, we understand that it is a great and profound poem, not because of its accuracy, mordancy, and poetic brilliance with which Johnson appropriated juvenile satire on the public degeneracy and squalor of Rome to the social and political circumstances of Walpole's London, though these things are real enough, but because Johnson fuses with his public satire a deeply impassioned presentation of the mind in distress that is wholly absent in Juvenal. Johnson's satire presents us with a society containing in itself the elements of its own destruction. It's an irony, but that's true. An enemy within which will ultimately subvert, Johnson felt, and betray it. Human minds in this society are fractured, he says, hypocritical, deluded, deceived, or otherwise divorced and separated from their own better interests. Where Juvenal consistently presents an integrated observer reacting to Rome with a fine, we may call it saeva indignatio, fierce indignation or anger at essential human folly that perhaps cannot be removed or rectified. Johnson's Thales is more shaken by the world he decries and may even have taken on something of its fated and self-destructive character. As a poem, London goes on to describe other evils of life in the city and the society, not all attributable to pernicious foreign influence, and rises to a climax in the presentation of what we would call, in today's terms, a law and order issue. The citizen who goes out at night is exposed to the insults and random violence of the fiery fop and frolic drunkard, as Johnson says in the poem. And even when he returns home, his house is not secure from the burglar or the murderous housebreaker. It is in this treating to the citizen in his home that London clinches the theme of the enemy who comes within with an imaginative intensity altogether absent from the original poem and other versions of it. The damage being done to London is registered in Johnson's poem as damage to human integrity. The city has been subverted and affording no economic or physical security for its native citizens. It affords no mental security as well. In the poem, we find that Johnson is not a rational observer, or his speakers, for example, are not rational observers. He inveighs against the city in a mood of what we may call an impassioned distress. At one point, particularly angered by the way London has become the common drain or sewer of Paris and Rome, as he says, he senses that he is getting carried away and pulls himself up with an exclamation of peevishness. And he says, "Forgive my transports on a theme like this. I cannot bear a French metropolis." Some critics have assumed that this poem took a far less negative view of the city than Johnson personally felt. For example, John Johnston, a celebrated critic of Samuel Johnson, ascribes the poem's failure to reflect Johnson's awareness of the city as a place of almost infinite material and cultural possibilities to the fact that the author is constrained by his Juvenalian satirical model and by his inflexible moralizing purpose. By contrast, another critic, John Wynne, makes a similar point and detects in the mode of the poem an affirmative subtext when he says, "On another level, the poem becomes London in tone, in strategy, in the nature of its art. It is metropolitan. It signals an acceptance of the values of 18th century civilization at their most urbane and sophisticated." He argues that while Johnson always saw London as a heartless city, he always accepted it at the level of intellect and art. As a corollary of the apparent failure of London to articulate all Johnson felt about the city, notice is commonly drawn to the fact that while Juvenal is rather sardonic about the appeal of an austere rural life as an alternative to the busy life in a city, Johnson effectively idealizes it. Points of this kind have a validity, but not one that bears much on the poem London as we have it. What delighted the literary circles of London, the city, and impressed Pope in his time was not just a poem ingeniously adapting Juvenal's satirical model to the political and social conditions of London in 1738. London was a great new poem because it brought to Juvenal a new tone and a new theme, and sought to reinforce its presentation of social catastrophe by revealing and exploiting the dangers to the private mind in a world subverted by an insidious, hidden, but powerful enemy from within, from which ironically there cannot be any escape because of its multitudinous forms and the depth at which it has been entrenched in the society. So this is a very basic background information that we need to know on Johnson's London. In a subsequent class or classes, I'll be going into the text at some detail in order to understand the historical nuances which build up Johnson's arguments. Thank you.